Okay, so we have decided. Okay, we're gonna read a fan fiction.
It's her fan fiction.
I wrote it, so whatever. We are both fans. Nothing. We have no affiliation with the Carmilla cast or crew whatsoever.
Other than being fans.
Yes, and so yes, we're gonna read my fan fiction. Try to get through this without laughing, although no promising because this one tends to have an interesting sense of humor. So yes, if we mess up, I apologize. Okay, here we go. You've done some stupid things in your life, but this definitely takes the cake. Carmilla couldn't help but think as she paced the murky shoreline of the sea. With a sigh, she plopped down in the moist soil, pulling at her boots. What's the point in ruining them for something that will probably kill her the second she touches it anyway?
Go away, Carmilla. Go run and hide. We're done.
Laura's words kept replaying in her head, forcing her to clench her hands into fists, and let out an angry, muffled scream into her knees that somehow managed to make their way to her chest as she fought back tears of frustration. Stupid, naive provincial girl. Stupid vampire. Carmilla's words came out in a half-hiss, half-chuckle. Wiping the tears off her cheeks with her palms, forcing herself to stand, she dragged herself to where the water and soil met. A small smile crept onto her lips as the cold of the water met with her skin. Her body shivered as the even cooler breeze from the sea hit her. Nothing but a reflex from simpler times. Letting one last sigh escape her lips, she waded her way out into the sea until she could plunge into deeper waters. Part of her hoping this ideal wouldn't be completely tedious and pointless.
I want to go to the party.
Okay. LaFontaine whined as they tried their best to turn over on Laura's bed, only managing to tangle themselves in the sheets, Perry sighing in frustration over the fact that there was nothing she could do.
Why would she do that?
Laura sighed mostly to herself. Laura, she's a vampire and that's part of that ancient evil. You did the right thing. And besides, she wasn't helping much anyway, Perry stated matter-of-factly as she tried to keep LaFontaine still as they mumbled away about parties.
She told me she wanted to help. How could I be so stupid?
With a huff, Laura thumped her head against her desk. Don't be so hard on yourself.
Easier said than done. When are we going to the party?
LaFontaine huffed into Perry's lap.
And then there's that. We're in monumental trouble.
Laura practically shrieked as she threw her back against her chair, spinning her chair around to face a concerned Perry. After what felt like a century, Carmilla's head broke the surface of the sea. Panting out of reflex, she forced herself. That does not sound like panting. It's totally different, but okay. She forced herself to swim to the shore, dragging the success of her mission along with her. Finally reaching the shore, she crawled just out of reach of the receding tide, letting her hands and knees weaken under her as she laid in the soil. Oh God. You lied once more, Mother. Her voice came out hoarse from her panting as she pulled the sword into her vision. It glistened in almost blinding gold as the sunlight hit it. The bright light of it reminded Carmilla of Laura's smile. The thought of it had a gentle grin breaking over the vampire's features.
Hell, even you deserve better.
The human girl's words echoed in her memory. What if you were that better, Cupcake? She whispered to herself, clutching the hilt of the sword like her life depended on it. Ironically enough, it probably did. Forcing herself up, Carmilla pulled her boots back on. Looking back out to the sea once more, she cracked a smirk. Loving her is the dumbest thing you could have ever done, she thought to herself as she clutched the sword and began the trip back to Silas, back to Mother, back to the human she had to prove herself to. There's been no sign of her vampire roommate for almost 3 days now, and the thought of something bad happening to the girl, albeit Carmilla was responsible for the disappearance of Kirsch, caused Laura to feel what she thought was an unnecessary amount of guilt for yelling at the vampire. Carmilla had been stuck in between a rock and a hard place. But why didn't she just let her mother take Laura and rid herself of the trouble the human roommate had been causing? Wow, you did some progress on the stakes. I'm surprised. Danny spoke as she appeared in the doorway to the room.
Oh, yeah. Perry needed some sort of stress reliever with what with LaFontaine getting worse and all.
Laura spoke almost hesitantly as she began to arm herself with stakes from the pile of over 100 that laid on her bed. Still no sign of Morticia, huh? Excuse me. Danny crossed the room to stand by Laura's side, taking up stakes to give herself an excuse to stand so close to the tiny brunette. 'Tis you.
After I said my piece, she left. Probably gone for good, as it's almost been 3 days.
Hey, remember she's responsible for Kirsch being gone. Her absence is for the best, Danny chided, sensing the start of remorse in Laura's voice. The smaller girl didn't respond. I'm sorry, by the way, for how I've treated you.
What?
You've been trying to save girls and put a stop to this evil. Anyone can see that it's important to you. I'm sorry for treating the videos like I did. I was just really worried about you, and I didn't want you to get hurt, Danny sighed as she faced Laura. This friendship, or relationship, or whatever we have here, it means a lot to me. You mean a lot to me.
You mean a lot to me too, Danny.
Laura smiled brightly, excited at the progress they were making since the sort of breakup. The taller girl met the other's smile as she leaned down into her instinctively. We are not playing out that part, so yeah.
Kiss sound effect.
I would totally play the sound of Laura kissing.
Just go.
Okay. Carmilla managed to trudge the miles back to Silas with a smirk on her lips. As much as she hated to think about Laura since their fight, she couldn't help but imagine the look on the human's face when she proudly stormed into their room, sword at her side. Finally reaching the familiar door, which had been left wide open, she prepared herself for what she half hoped would be a heroic entrance. What is she doing to you? The vampire thought to herself as she shook away any heroic thoughts. Reaching the doorway, she suddenly froze. Her smirk turned into a sharp frown as her heart plummeted at the sight of her tiny roommate kissing the tall ginger Amazon. Wow. She stood frozen for what felt like years, holding back an angry and hurt shriek of frustration. Before either of the girls noticed, the vampire took off, tears filling her eyes.
That silly little creature couldn't have loved you.
Her mother's words echoed in her memory, making the vampire run faster.
Stone cannot love flesh.
Carmilla ran until tears blurred her vision completely, and she found she had to force herself to prop against a tree once her legs gave out.
Sometimes that's just the way of the world, and we must learn to bear it as best we can.
She opened her mouth, finally letting out the scream that threatened to rip her apart as she sank into the fetal position. Clutching her knees to her chest, she angrily sobbed into her knees.
Danny!
Laura gasped as she gently pushed the taller girl away. Sorry, I'm having a moment in my head right now. I'm sorry. I let my emotions, and I'm sorry, Laura. The taller girl sat on the edge of Laura's bed.
Danny, you like me. I get that. And at one point, I felt the same way. But, well, things have changed.
Laura struggled to explain. You love her. Danny interrupted, showing a small smile.
What?
Laura, don't be coy. I knew the second you wanted to untie her. I just didn't want to believe it.
Even if that were true, she's gone. Probably ran as far away from this whole mess as she could. And the worst part is, I don't even blame her. I've watched the video so many times, and all I can think is that she's only ever loved Elle. And, well, will only ever love Elle. I was an idiot, and I pushed her away.
Laura sighed, taking the seat next to Danny. You are an idiot.
Excuse me?
Laura, how are you so blind to the fact that she probably feels the same way about you? Danny's voice came out with an exasperated laugh.
There's no way.
Laura practically shrieked. You are the most oblivious person I have ever met. Do you even watch your videos before you upload them? Laura nodded in reply. And yet you've never seen how she looks at you. The flirting is enough to almost make me want her.
But she always seems so annoyed with me.
Which is why in 1698 it may as well have been sex.
Oh my god.
It all suddenly hit Laura. The flirting, the cocoa, the dreams, the charm, the seduction eyes, the willingness to get the sword.
Oh my god.
The sword!
She wouldn't.
Laura was suddenly standing and pacing the space between her and the vampire's bed. She wouldn't what? Danny watched the scatterbrained girl, almost amused but very worried.
The blade of Haster. Carm was going to go get it, but then her mother pretty much talked her out of it because it would kill her the second she touched it. I yelled at her and she probably went and got the sword.
If that's the case, then Laura...
She's dead and it's all my fault. I yelled at her and she went and got the sword and died trying to bring it back, which is why she's been gone for 3 days. This is all my fault.
Laura shrieked, falling to sit on Carmilla's bed.
How could I be so stupid?
Laura, look at me. This is not your fault. If Carmilla really did go to get the sword, then it was her choice, regardless of whether or not you yelled at her. You know she did it because she cared about you. All you can do now is not let her death be in vain, Danny reasoned, pulling Laura out of her thoughts.
Yeah, you're totally right.
Laura nodded, the yellow pillow on her bed catching her eyes. Standing, she crossed to her bed and grabbed the object, clutching it to her chest. It smelled of her lavender and lilac-scented shampoo and faintly of cocoa, but there was another familiar scent there of vanilla and cinnamon. Carmilla. The thought of her roommate now brought tears to her eyes. Crossing back to Carmilla's bed, Laura placed the pillow down with a small smile. You ready for this, Laura? Danny spoke up after letting the smaller girl have her moment.
The Dean will never know what hit her.
Laura spoke up determinedly. Okay. It had been a few hours by the time Carmilla had calmed the tears to a stop, honing her hearing in on Laura and her friends as they began to psych themselves up to face the Dean. From the sounds of it, they had more stakes than a 24-mile-long picket fence and not enough hands to use. The Zetas in Summer Society had come together to help, even though they knew very little detail. But once Danny told both parties that Laura wasn't to blame and that the situation was out of her control, they reconciled their differences. For now. Incompetent idiots, Carmilla mumbled as she stood, grabbing the sword. As much as she wanted to run as far away from the situation as possible, something in her gut told her that Laura would need her. The vampire knew she'd never forgive herself if anything happened to the tiny human that she could have prevented. With an indignant sigh, she began to trek back to the Stylus buildings. Bum, bum, bum. Laura walked with her head held high as she led the small mob of her friends, Zetas, and Summer Society members to the Dean's office. Even with this small army behind her, she couldn't help but feel so extremely nervous and anxious. They were going against an ancient evil that was probably older than Earth itself, and all they had were a couple hundred stakes and some riled up 18 to 24-year-olds. On second thought, maybe this wasn't the best idea. You seem nervous, Perry spoke up evenly from Laura's left.
Can you blame me? I came to the school for journalism degree and to get some freedom from my dad. I never thought I'd be walking to my certain doom with a stake in my hand to fight some ancient evil light demon thing.
You're not seriously having second thoughts now, are you? Danny chimed in from Laura's right.
Well, yes, no, sort of?
Laura sighed, biting her lip. Laura, remember what we talked about. Do it for her, Danny reasoned.
Yeah, you're right.
Laura nodded, her eyes watery with the thought of the vampire whom would have been screaming at her to run while she had the chance. Which would be really smart right now. Of course I am, Danny declared, relieved when a smile cracked over Laura's features. Carmilla followed close behind the small army, picking up on little conversations here and there.
Do it for her.
The familiar voice of the Amazonian ginger met her ears.
Yeah, you're right.
Laura chimed.
Of course I am.
The vampire couldn't help but smirk at the bluntness of the tall ginger's confidence. When the small army came to a stop outside the huge black marble double doors of the dean's office, Carmilla hid in the shadows just out of sight. She didn't want to risk being seen right now, not when she may have not been needed. Sorry, I know it's coming with this one, so I can't help but laugh.
Keep going.
Okay. Perry's you.
Do we knock?
Oh, did you make an appointment?
Well...
Guys, she can probably hear us. Thanks. I know, I don't care. Laura sighed as she psyched herself up. With one last deep breath, Laura pushed the giant doors open and stepped into the room with as much confidence as she could muster. Her friends following behind. Okay.
Calm down.
Okay. No one knew how the fight began. Only that 1 second the Dean and Laura were trying to compromise with each other, and the next second Zetas and Summer Society members were being thrown against bookcases, walls, and breakable objects. Carmilla had managed to sneak her way in without being noticed and had stuck to preying on the outside of the brawl. The vampire tried her best to keep her eyes on the tiny human she cared about, but that was a harder task than she anticipated, as the room was full of 6 foot tall people that towered over her. Laura, no! A shriek from inside the mass of people caught the vampire's attention, the crowd suddenly cleared to show Carmilla's worst fear coming true. The Dean had an arm around Laura's waist, holding the holding the human to herself in a vice grip as her other arm threatened to snap the human's neck.
You really thought you could take me down with some chunks of sharpened wood and a few dozen flailing humans? Oh, you silly girl.
The Dean chuckled, her voice booming in the dead silence of the room. Let her go! Danny shrieked, moving to take a step forward, only to falter as the Dean playfully jerked her arm that was around Laura's neck, threatening to do the quick motion.
Danny, no! Stay back!
Laura pleaded with the Amazon, who was looking desperate for a solution.
Yes, Danny, dear. Stay back. Or else I'll snap her neck like a twig.
The Dean chuckled.
Besides, my real concern is around here somewhere. Come out now, Carmilla. Sweetheart.
The crowd around them perked up at the mention of the vampire's name, all looking shocked as Carmilla made her presence known by walking to where her mother stood with Laura. Hello, Mother. Carmilla spat, looking all sorts of angry.
Hello, dear. So nice of you to join us. I thought I told you to keep your little pet here under control.
Oh yes, it's so inconvenient when they fight back, isn't it? Carmilla snickered, refusing to meet Laura's eyes that peered at her in disbelief.
You know, it's unfortunate that her wife had to come to an end like this, in the prime of her youth, cut down like an insignificant little roach she is.
The Dean smiled as she revealed her fangs that seemed too long for her body. Wait, Mother! Carmilla spoke, panicked, drawing the older woman's attention back to her.
Yes, dear.
Remember, you may be older, but I was always faster. Carmilla smirked as she lunged toward the older woman, forcing herself to her top speed as she watched the Dean lunge into Laura's neck. You did that too early, but okay. No mere mortal eye could have captured the scene that unfolded between the Dean, Carmilla, and Laura. The 2 seconds it took the Dean to sink her fangs deep into Laura's neck, causing the human to shriek out in pain, which is where it's supposed to be, meant that Carmilla had slashed the blade across the nape of her mother's neck in 1 second. Laura was thrown to the hardwood floor as the Dean lunged for Carmilla, using the last seconds of her life to fight the much younger vampire. 2 seconds passed, and Carmilla was thrown against a bookshelf as her mother lunged after her, choking on her last bit of life as she sunk her fangs into the younger vampire's neck. Carmilla managed to plunge the blade in her hand forward between the space of her and her mother as the older vampire began to feed on the younger. 5 seconds later, the Dean released her fangs from the younger as its stake was driven into her chest from behind. Both vampires fell to the floor as Perry backed away from what she had done, the room falling silent. That's you.
Carmilla!
Laura's voice finally rang out as she fought her way from Danny's grasp and ran toward the scene. I killed the Dean! Perry began to mumble to herself as she backed away to lean against the Dean's desk, soon met by Danny. I killed the Dean! Perry, it's okay. Danny hugged the woman to her as she continued to mumble.
Carmilla!
Laura could feel tears welling up in her eyes as she pulled the Dean off of Carmilla's still body. Other than the bite on her neck that was... Can you stop that?
Sorry.
That was bleeding rather profusely for someone who was no longer living. She didn't seem to be too hurt. Hey, Cupcake. Carmilla spoke as Laura pulled her into her arms.
I thought you were dead. The blade of Hasta should have killed you the second you touched it.
Laura spoke, tears now falling from her eyes freely. Just one more thing my mother lied to me about. Carmilla chuckled. Why are you crying?
I thought you were dead. I yelled at you and you left and you were gone for 3 days. And I figured you went around after the sword, which was supposed to kill you.
Laura choked. Ironic how life works out, I suppose.
You know, for an undead vampire, you sure do bleed a lot.
Laura observed from the vampire's now blood-coated neck and shoulder. I'll need to feed now that you've mentioned it. Carmilla spoke, feeling her fangs make themselves known. Without a second thought, Laura moved her hair to one side, revealing the bite mark that the Dean had left minutes earlier. Carmilla leaned forward hesitantly.
It's okay, Carm.
Laura spoke calmly. With that, the vampire leaned into Laura, sinking her fangs into the already placed bite marks. She pulled the human closer. Pulling the human closer, she fed for a few seconds before pulling away. Stop it. Wiping her mouth on the back of her hand, she smiled a thank you to the human. Glad you can make it, little nerd hottie. Kirsch called out to Laura as he handed her a solo cup full of a somewhat foul-smelling mixture of alcohol and pop.
Yeah, of course. Wouldn't have missed it for the world.
Laura chimed with a smile. I had to. It had only been a few. That was totally inspired by Andy Briggs, just saying. It had only been a few hours since Perry and Carmilla had killed the... Fuck you. Killed the... Is it still recording?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Had killed the Dean, and they had found Natalie and Betty. LaFontaine was back to normal, spouting on about how frustrated they were that they missed the epic battle and were amazed that Perry had staked the Dean in the end. Perry tried not to talk about it, as she was still in a bit of a shock, and had started to stress clean any dorm someone would allow her in. After learning that another girl had moved into the dorm, Betty packed up and moved down the hall very willingly, but she left the crown on the headboard as per Carmilla's strange request for the piece of shiny plastic, which I added for her. Okay. Hey, Laura, how's the bite mark feeling? Danny asked as she danced her way to the tiny human.
It's better. Still a little sore, but healing.
Laura smiled, laughing amusedly at the tall ginger as she danced. Well, that's good. Well, that's good. Isn't Carmilla supposed to be here with you?
Yeah, she was just talking to someone.
Then why is she walking back to the dorms alone? Danny pointed out. I probably skipped some shit, but anyway. Laura turned and saw that Carmilla was in fact walking back to the dorms.
Should I?
Yes, you oblivious idiot. Go after her! Danny sighed as she danced away to a group of summer society girls. Okay. Ah, shit. Entering the room, Carmilla went straight to the camera that sat on Laura's desk. Turning the small thing on, she sat in the chair. Hey, Cupcake. Laura. Don't ask me why I've always called you all those nicknames. It just felt right. But now, Laura feels right, I suppose. Anyway, I'm making this video as a goodbye. Carmilla choked on the last word, clearing her throat to compose herself. With Mother gone, I'm free of the ritual and the sacrifices. Okay. And I can't thank you enough for that. At the same time, I can see I'm no longer needed here. You have Perry and LaFontaine and that annoying ginger giant of yours. So make sure to enjoy life. And keep fighting for justice, Veronica Mars. You'll get your chance someday. She fought herself internally on how to end the video. Last thing, though, just know that I love...
Carm, what are you doing?
Laura's voice echoed through the room as she walked through the doorway. The vampire spun around in her chair. In the chair, wow. Laura, I was just... She looked back at the camera before sighing. I was leaving a goodbye video.
What? Why? You're not leaving, are you?
Laura crossed the empty space between herself and the vampire to sit on the edge of her bed. It's for the best, Laura. You have Perry and LaFontaine and Danny and everyone else. You don't need me in your life anymore. Carmilla bit her lip and stared down at the floor.
What are you talking about? You helped us defeat the Dean. And everything. Of course I need you in my life.
You've got your friends and you're not dating your lit TA.
Dating my lit TA? What are you talking about?
Laura shook her head. I saw you and Danny kissing, Laura. I can take a hint.
Oh, God. No, Carm. Danny kissed me, yes, but we're not dating. If anything, she helped me realize my feelings for someone else.
With that, the vampire raised an eyebrow. Oh, really? And who's that lucky human?
Well, first off, she's not a human.
Laura smiled innocently as Carmilla met her eyes. Laura, no. I'll only hurt you in the end, and you said so yourself. I'm the worst roommate ever. Carmilla reasoned as she stood, only to have Laura stand as well.
You're right. You are the worst roommate ever. You never clean a damn thing, and you leave your filth everywhere. And would it kill you to clean the shower drain once?
Laura began to rant, only causing Carmilla to start to walk toward the door, just to be met with Laura grabbing her arm.
But you're also sweet.
Hurry up.
And a bit romantic when you want to be. You even made me cocoa on occasions.
Laura smiled. Your little rant here isn't working, Cupcake. Carmilla had to force herself to pull against Laura's grip.
Carm.
Give me one good reason to stay. Carmilla growled, half hoping that the human wouldn't have anything to say to that. She was right. Laura didn't have any words to say to that. What she responded with instead was pulling the vampire close as she kissed her gently. Laura was a bit surprised at what it felt like to kiss a vampire. She had expected to feel fangs and taste blood, but was instead met with softness and the slight taste of alcohol from the party they had left. Nothing compared to it.
Please stay,
Laura whispered as they pulled away, Carmilla resting her forehead against Laura's as she took in her sweet scent. Okay. I promise to never leave, Carmilla whispered back as she wrapped her arms around the human's waist, Laura burying her face in the vampire's neck as she wrapped her arms around her shoulders. And that, my friends, is my very first fan fiction that I've written. That was interesting.